Hey everyone, and welcome back to Western Flavors. Before we begin our new episode, let's recap the emotional and heartbreaking events from our last story. We saw a determined Ty make the impossible choice to leave Heartland to hunt down Nathan. His departure was a painful, tearful farewell, not just for him, but for the entire family. But his journey immediately took a dark turn as he began to question the scene of the kind truck driver that rescued him. A hot conspiracy is brewing, and Ty does not know what to do about it. Back at Heartland, Lindy's heartbreak over her father's absence led to Amy making a powerful, life-altering promise to keep him safe. If you missed that incredible, suspenseful story, the full playlist is linked for you in the description below. If you're enjoying this new season, please take a second to hit that like button and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Now, today, Amy acts on her promise, beginning her own dangerous journey into the heart of enemy territory. The airplane was a silver bullet, streaking through a vast, endless sea of brilliant blue sky. Below, the majestic snow-capped peaks of the Canadian Rockies were a jagged, breathtaking spine of rock and ice, a familiar, beloved landscape that was now, with every passing second, receding into the distance. Amy sat by the small, oval window, her forehead pressed against the cool glass, her gaze fixed on the world she was leaving behind. But her mind was 1,000 miles ahead, in a place she had never been, on a mission she could never have imagined. She was a woman at war, and she was flying into the heart of enemy territory. The decision, once made in the tearful, desperate aftermath of her promise to Lindy, had been a simple, powerful, and all-consuming force. The fear, the hesitation, the quiet, sensible voice in her head that had screamed at her to stay safe, to stay home, it had all been silenced by the fierce, primal, and unwavering roar of a mother's and a wife's protective love. She had made a promise, and she would move heaven and earth to keep it. She felt a strange and deeply, deeply unfamiliar sense of fulfillment. For 4 long years, she had been a passive participant in her own life, a woman to whom things happened. Her husband's death, her daughter's grief, her own slow, painful healing, Nathan's gentle courtship, Ty's miraculous return, the revelation of the conspiracy, she had been a reactive force, a survivor, a person who had weathered a relentless series of emotional storms. But now, for the first time, she was not weathering the storm. She was flying into the eye of it. She was taking control. The feeling was terrifying, and it was exhilarating. She thought of Nathan. The memory of him, which had been a source of such profound and deeply, deeply confusing emotions just a few short weeks ago, was now a cold, hard, and deeply, deeply unsettling puzzle. Her mind, a place that was so good at seeing the quiet, unspoken truths in a troubled horse's eye, now began to turn that same analytical gaze onto her own recent past. And the things she saw, the small, seemingly insignificant details she had so easily dismissed at the time, now came back to her with a new and deeply, deeply sinister clarity. She remembered the night of his proposal, the beautiful, romantic, and perfectly orchestrated scene under the stars. And she remembered the phone call in the truck on the way home, the one he had said was business. She remembered the sudden cold and hard shift in his demeanor, the voice of a man who was used to giving orders, a voice that was completely at odds with the gentle, loving fiancé he had been just moments before. "We got it. It's all under control now," he had said. And she now knew, with a sickening, horrifying certainty, what it was. He had been talking about Ty, about his capture. He had been proposing to her, a beautiful, glittering ring in his pocket, while her real husband, the father of her child, was being hunted down and imprisoned by his men. The sheer monstrous and sociopathic evil of it was a thing she could not and would not ever be able to comprehend. And yet, a small, treacherous, and deeply human part of her heart still ached with a confused and deeply, deeply shameful sense of loss. She thought of the other Nathan, the kind, patient, and steady man who had been her friend, the man who had shown up, time and time again, with a quiet, gentle, and unconditional support, the man who had been a loving, wonderful father figure to her daughter, the man who had, in her darkest, most lonely moments, been a single, steady light. Was all of it a lie? Every single, kind word, every gentle, supportive gesture, every shared, quiet moment of understanding, had it all been a part of his long, patient, and evil game? The thought was a new and even more profound kind of betrayal. It was not just the betrayal of a villain, it was the betrayal of a friend. And it was a betrayal that made her question not just him, but her own judgment, her own heart. She, Amy Fleming, the woman who could see into the very soul of a broken horse, had been completely and utterly blind to the monster who had been standing right in front of her for 4 long years. The shame of it, the foolishness of it, was a bitter metallic taste in her mouth. She was not just a victim, she was a fool, and that was a truth that was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. While Amy was grappling with the ghosts of her own recent past, suspended in a metal tube 7 miles above the earth, Ty was on the ground wrestling with a much more tangible and infinitely more confusing set of problems. The story shifts from the quiet, internal, and emotional landscape of Amy's journey to the harsh physical and deeply suspicious reality of his. He was back at the border, the same desolate and unpatrolled section of the vast wooded wilderness that separated the Alberta foothills from the high country of Montana. He had spent the last 2 days making his way here on horseback, a journey of quiet, focused, and deeply resolute determination. He had said his goodbyes, he had made his promises, and now he was a man with a single, all-consuming purpose: to get back into the United States, to find his way back into the heart of the Price Syndicate's territory, and to begin the slow, patient, and dangerous work of hunting the man who had stolen his life. He had expected the journey to be difficult, but he had not expected this. He was standing in the deep, concealing cover of a stand of pine trees, looking out at the same invisible line he had crossed with such a desperate, triumphant hope just a few short weeks ago. But the landscape was different, terribly different. The easy, unguarded passage he had found on his journey to Canada, the simple 20-foot-wide path of cleared earth and low brush, was gone. In its place was a new and deeply, deeply unsettling reality. The quiet, forgotten service road that ran parallel to the border, the same road where he had seen the ghost of Frank's truck, was now a scene of quiet, professional, and highly efficient activity. He could see 2 new unmarked SUVs parked at regular intervals, their dark-tinted windows a menacing, unseeing presence in the wilderness. He saw men, not in the uniforms of the official Border Patrol, but in the same dark, practical, and quasi-military gear that Nathan's goons had worn, moving with a quiet, practiced ease through the trees. They were installing small, discreet, and high-tech motion sensor cameras on the trees that lined the border. The open, unguarded back door into his own country had been slammed, locked, and bolted shut. A cold, hard knot of a new and deeply paranoid thought began to form in his gut. This was not a coincidence. This heightened security, this sudden professional lockdown of a previously forgotten stretch of wilderness, it was because of him. They knew he was coming back. They were waiting for him. But it was the other thought, the one that was even more terrifying, that made his blood run cold. He thought back to his first crossing, his desperate nighttime scramble through these same woods. He had thought his successful passage had been a product of his own skill, of his own resilience, of a simple dumb luck. But now, seeing the professional, high-tech, and completely inescapable nature of the security that had been put in place in just a few short weeks, he knew that was a lie. His initial, easy escape from Montana, the journey that had been initiated by the guilty supervisor, the journey that had been facilitated by the kind truck driver, Frank, it had not been an escape at all. It had been an illusion. They had let him go. They had, for some unknown and deeply sinister reason, allowed the ghost to return to Heartland. They had guided him, had watched him, had manipulated his entire journey home. The full claustrophobic and terrifying scope of the conspiracy was now, finally, beginning to reveal itself. He was not just a man who had been a prisoner in a single concrete room. He had been a prisoner in a much, much larger and more insidious cage. His entire life, his every move for the last 4 years had been a part of their plan. The question was no longer just why they had taken him. The new and infinitely more terrifying question was why they had let him go back. He was not a hunter, on his way to confront his enemy. He was a pawn. A piece in a game so vast, so complex, and so deeply, deeply evil that he couldn't even begin to see the edges of the board. And he had just, with his own 2 foolish feet, walked right back into the middle of it. While Ty was confronting the chilling new reality of his own, manipulated past at the desolate US-Canada border, a different and much more hopeful kind of journey was reaching its destination. The story cuts from the tense, paranoid wilderness of Ty's solo mission to the bright, anonymous, and bustling environment of the Great Falls International Airport in Montana. The flight from Calgary had been a long, introspective, and deeply emotional journey for Amy. She had spent the hours in the air wrestling with the ghosts of her own recent past, with the beautiful, kind, and ultimately deceptive mirage of her relationship with Nathan. But with every mile that separated her from the familiar, complicated landscape of her own life, a new and powerful sense of clarity had begun to settle over her. She was no longer just a victim in this story. She was a player. She was a fighter. And she was on her way to join the war for her family's future. She walked through the arrival gate, A solitary, determined figure in the stream of anonymous travelers. She was scanning the crowd, her eyes searching for the one, single, and familiar friendly face she knew would be waiting for her on this side of the border. And then she saw him, Caleb Odell, leaning against a pillar, his signature white cowboy hat pulled low, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked tired, he looked worried, but the moment he saw her, a wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over his face. He had been waiting for hours, his mind a chaotic whirl of his own. He had taken the first flight out of Calgary, just as Ty had instructed, a soldier on a secret solo mission. He had landed in this strange, unfamiliar American city with a single clear objective, to be Ty's eyes and ears on the ground, to find his friend Hank, to be the backup. But the last-minute secret phone call he had received from Amy just a few hours before had changed everything. His simple, straightforward mission had just become infinitely more complicated. He watched as Amy walked towards him, and he had to quickly and expertly school his features into a mask of pure, believable surprise.
Amy, what in the hell are you doing here?
His performance was a masterpiece of stunned, disbelieving shock. Amy, her own mind so focused on her own mission, didn't even register the subtle, inauthentic note in his voice.
I could ask you the same thing. I thought you were supposed to be helping Jack with the fences.
Yeah, well, Ty, he asked me to come down here to check on a horse for him, a lead on a new bloodline. You know how he gets when he gets an idea in his head.
The lie was flimsy, but it was the best he could come up with on the spot, and it was enough, for now.
Right, of course,
She said, a small, knowing smile on her face. They were both lying, and they both, on some deep, unspoken level, knew it. They were two co-conspirators, two allies in the same secret war, who were for the moment not yet ready to share their own individual battle plans. The first thing Amy did, before they even left the airport, was to find a quiet corner and pull out her phone. She had to make the most important call of all. She dialed the familiar number of the Heartland ranch, her heart a mixture of a deep, profound love and a sharp, painful guilt.
Amy, where are you? Your note just said you had to go away for a couple of days.
His voice was a welcome, grounding rumble, but she could hear the deep and profound worry that lay just beneath the surface.
I'm okay, Grandpa. I promise I'm in Montana.
She heard his sharp, surprised intake of breath on the other end of the line.
I can't explain everything right now, but I had to come, for Ty, to help him. I promise I will be safe, and I promise I will call you every single day. Can you? Can you put Lindy on?
The conversation with her daughter was a beautiful, heartbreaking, and deeply, deeply necessary thing. She listened as Lindy chattered happily about her day, about a new trick she had taught her pony, about a funny thing Jack had said at dinner, and with every word the emotional stakes of her own dangerous mission were raised. This was what she was fighting for, this beautiful, innocent, and perfect little girl.
I love you to the moon and back, sweetie. You be a good girl for Grandpa Jack, okay? And I will be home before you know it, I promise.
She hung up the phone, a single silent tear tracing a path down her cheek. The call had been a powerful and deeply painful reminder of the world she had just left behind and of the dangerous, uncertain world she was now, willingly stepping into. Caleb, who had been a quiet, respectful witness to the emotional conversation, now stepped forward, his own expression one of a new and deeply, deeply serious purpose.
Okay, so what's the plan? We're here. Now what?
Now, we find a motel, and we wait for Ty to make contact. And in the meantime, we start doing our own research.
They walked out of the airport and into the bright, unfamiliar light of a Montana afternoon. They were no longer just a wife and a best friend. They were a team, an advanced team, and they were a long, long way from home. While Amy and Caleb were establishing their new secret base of operations in the relative comfort of a Great Falls motel, Ty was still 100 miles to the north, a lone, frustrated figure in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the borderlands. The story cuts from the quiet, strategic hope of their new partnership to the harsh, solitary reality of his own, seemingly impossible mission. He had spent the entire afternoon and the better part of the evening in a state of growing and deeply, deeply unsettling frustration. His initial paranoid suspicion that his first, easy journey into Canada had been a manipulated, orchestrated event was now hardening into a cold, hard, and undeniable fact. The easy, unguarded passage he had found on his journey to Canada was gone. It had vanished, as if it had never existed. He had returned to the exact spot where he had first stumbled out of the woods and onto the paved two-lane highway. He had walked the line of the forest, his eyes scanning for the familiar hidden trail he had used, but there was nothing, only a dense, impenetrable wall of thorny undergrowth and thick, ancient pine trees. He had spent hours in a frustrating grid-pattern search, pushing his way deeper into the woods, his mind a sharp, analytical map of the terrain. But the path, the one his own 2 feet had walked just a few short weeks ago, had completely and utterly disappeared. It was not just the path that was gone. The entire area was different. The sense of a quiet, forgotten, and unpatrolled wilderness had been replaced by a new and deeply, deeply unsettling sense of being watched. He had found the small, discreet, and high-tech motion sensor cameras that Nathan's men had been installing. Their small, black, and unblinking eyes a constant, silent presence in the trees. He had seen the fresh tire tracks of the unmarked SUVs on the remote service roads. The border was not just closed, it was sealed. A high-tech, invisible fortress, a trap that was designed not just to keep people out, but to keep one specific person, him. The full claustrophobic and terrifying scope of Nathan's power, of his foresight, was a sobering and deeply, deeply intimidating realization. He was not just fighting a man. He was fighting a network, a powerful and seemingly omniscient organization that was always one frustrating step ahead of him. He knew, with a certainty that settled in his gut like a stone, that a direct illegal crossing here was now impossible. It would be a foolish and almost certainly fatal act of suicide. He would be spotted within minutes, and he would be captured, or worse, before he had even made it a mile. He was a man who had just run into a brick wall, and he had no idea how to get around it. He was forced to retreat, a bitter, frustrating, and deeply humbling admission of defeat. He made his way back under the cover of the approaching darkness, away from the heavily surveilled borderline, and deeper into the relative safety of the Canadian wilderness. He was exhausted, he was hungry, and for the first time since his memory had returned, he was beginning to feel a flicker of a profound and deeply, deeply demoralizing despair. He finally found a place to make a cold, discreet camp for the night, a small sheltered clearing a good few miles from the border. He did not risk a fire. He just sat in the darkness, his back against the rough, cold bark of a tree, and he was forced to confront the new and seemingly insurmountable reality of his situation. He was trapped. He was a man with a vital, life-saving message, a man with a family to protect, a man with an enemy to hunt. And he was a lone, powerless warrior standing on the wrong side of a fortress, with no way in. The long, difficult, and dangerous journey home had just become a whole lot longer and a whole lot more dangerous. The quiet, anonymous motel room on the outskirts of Great Falls, Montana, had become the unlikely and deeply unglamorous forward operating base for Team Ty. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and a new, palpable sense of a shared, determined purpose. Amy and Caleb had spent the day in a state of quiet, focused activity. They had bought new, untraceable burner phones. They had studied a detailed map of the vast, rural landscape of central Montana, a place that was, for both of them, a completely foreign country. And they had talked, their conversation a low, constant murmur of strategy, of speculation, of two very different but equally powerful kinds of love for the same lost man. As night fell, a weary and deeply, deeply worried quiet settled over the room. Caleb, who had been a rock of steady, uncomplicated loyalty all day, finally succumbed to his own profound exhaustion and fell into a deep, restless sleep in one of the lumpy motel beds. But Amy could not sleep. Her mind was a racetrack, her thoughts a chaotic, high-speed blur of fear, of hope, and of a new and deeply, deeply unfamiliar sense of her own burgeoning power. She was not just a grieving widow anymore. She was not just a confused, heartbroken woman caught between two men. She was a fighter, a partner, a wife on a mission to save her husband. She sat in the quiet darkness of the motel room, the only light the cool, blue-white glow of her laptop screen. She was looking at the few precious belongings that Caleb had had the foresight to grab from Ty's hidden fishing hut, the last tangible remnants of his secret life. There was the worn, tattered journal, full of his fragmented, heartbreaking attempts to piece together his own past. There was the small, intricately carved wooden horse, a symbol of a love she now knew had never, ever truly been forgotten. And there was the phone, a cheap, disposable, and untraceable burner phone, the one he had used in his life as Benjamin Cooper. She had already looked through it. There were no messages, no contacts, save for one, a single, frequently called number, saved under a simple, one-word name, Hank. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was him. This was the man Ty had told her about, the one true friend from his lost years in Montana, the man who had been his anchor, his confidante, his brother. This was the man who held the key. He was the one person in this strange, unfamiliar world who knew the man her husband had been for the last 2 years. He was an ally, and Amy knew with a fierce strategic clarity that they needed all the allies they could get. She looked over at Caleb, at his peaceful, sleeping form, and she made a decision, a bold, secret, and deeply, deeply strategic one. Ty had asked Caleb to find Hank, but Ty was trapped on the other side of a sealed border, and she was here, now, and she was not a woman who was going to sit and wait. She picked up her own, new, and completely untraceable phone. Her hands, which had been trembling with a nervous, uncertain energy just a few short days ago, were now completely and utterly steady. She took a deep, fortifying breath, and she dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice, a lifetime of a second, and then a man's voice, a low, gravelly, and slightly suspicious-sounding rumble, answered on the other end of the line.
Hello?
The episode ends on a massive, powerful cliffhanger. The final shot is a tight, determined close-up of Amy's face, her eyes shining with a cool, intelligent, and unwavering resolve in the dim blue light of the motel room. She is no longer just a supportive partner in this mission, she is a commander, and she is about to recruit her first and most important new soldier.